Welcome to NBA Jam Tatman QC on Fire Edition. Boom shakalaka!
Happy little games. In the mid-1980s, the hearts of moviegoers were all aflutter when it came to martial arts in cinema. Quite obviously, the most influential martial artist on the big screen at the time would have to be Bruce Lee and the small amount of movies he was featured in. Thanks to the continued success of Jackie Chan with movies such as The Big Brawl and other flicks including Enter the Ninja and Chuck Norris in the Octagon, the general populace was starting to take notice, and that included video game developers. Today, we are taking a look at an arcade beat-em-up slasher that, no pun intended, didn't make much of a mark in the arcades, but it's fondly remembered on Nintendo's 8-bit platforms. The name of the game is The Legend of Kage, and it looked to replicate the high-flying, fast-paced ninja action that we all love so much. What is the Little Scene sequel that came out 23 years after the original? Let's find out as we learn about the history and the pronunciation of The Legend of Kage. By the time 1985 rolled around, the arcade giant Taito had released a staggering amount of games. This wasn't just quantity over quality, as they were the developers of a number of arcade classics such as Zookeeper, Elevator Action, Kicks, Jungle Hunt, and of course, 1982's Strike Bowling, complete with cheerleaders. Just from the years 1980 to 1985, the company had released over 160 arcade titles all across the world. Due to the onslaught and diverse catalog, along with the company still refusing developer credit for fear of companies poaching, we don't really know who made what. What we do know is that the company, like many other Japanese companies, looked to the West for inspiration and saw that martial arts movies were starting to become big business. According to sound designer Hisayoshi Ogura, the reason the company wanted to create such a diverse catalog of games was that so they could appeal to the widest demographic. When it came to the game's design, the developers took inspiration from IREM's side-scrolling beat-em-up Kung Fu Master. Not only did the developers like the fast-paced action, but something else that appealed to them was the movie-style cinematics. They wanted to up the ante, providing movie-style credits, cutscenes, as well as a fantastic musical score. As I mentioned, Mr. Ogura was tasked with the game's audio, and since it takes place in early Japan, he felt that the title needed a distinct Japanese feeling, and it sounds perfect. To give the game that good old-fashioned ninja feeling, you are equipped with shurikens as well as a sword. When it came to the name of the title, the Japanese name is Kage no Densetsu, but here in the States, it was known as The Legend of Kage, despite my 11-year-old self thinking otherwise. This game was almost canceled before it was released due to Taito having unleashed almost 40 games in just 1984 alone. Thankfully, it was shown off at the Tokyo Game Show in 1985, and it was a huge hit. Taito decided to take a chance, and it turned into a big seller for the company. The Legend of Kage was released by Taito in 1984. As the story goes, at the end of the Edo period, a group of evil individuals have come back to life known as the Devil's World. After kidnapping Princess Kiri, a number of militia were sent but never returned. One lone man remained, and his name was Kage. It's up to you to rescue the princess and save the day. This is a 1 or 2 player ninja hack and slash which features fairly realistic graphics in an era when things were still presented in a cartoony manner. The game starts out with Princess Kiri taking a nice stroll through the forest when all of a sudden she is abducted by the Devil's World clan. It's short and it's sweet, but it does bring it all together, creating a nice cinematic atmosphere. The graphics and especially the audio are top-notch, especially when compared to similar titles at the time. Your character of Kage is fast and nimble and has also been given the ability to leap over tall trees in a single bound with the greatest of ease. The controls are pretty simple, utilizing a standard 8-way joystick and 2 dedicated buttons, one for your sword and another for your shurikens. The sword is the more powerful of your attacks, but honestly, Kage must be suffering from a bit of sword envy because you have to be up close and personal for it to work. Your shurikens are definite long-range attacks and they can be thrown in any direction. As I mentioned, Kage can jump from tree to tree, but there is no dedicated button for this. You have to press up on the joystick to jump, which any self-respecting Commodore 64 user will know all too well. It never bothered me, but some people may find it's a bit more difficult. Kage can also squat or drop down a level by pushing down on the stick. There are your standard ninjas and monks that you have to deal with in games like these, but thankfully you do have a little help along the way. You can pick up a scroll which after grabbing it, every ninja within earshot will instantly drop dead. This also increases your score. With all the running and jumping, keep in mind that the enemies have to attack you in order to hurt you. Just running into them will not damage you in any way. The game is extremely fast-paced, which at times can be a bit overwhelming. The flubber-like leaping ability also takes a bit of getting used to, but once you do, you'll be slicing and dicing those nasty ninjas down in no time at all. The graphics are really good with some slick parallax scrolling and moody visuals such as lightning strikes. The game takes place across 5 distinct areas with some unique changes to the controls in each one. Area 1 is the forest scene in which you have to eliminate all the shinobi and yobos in each area to proceed. A vast underground cave in which even more of the shinobi will attack you. The cave level also has a green bar at the bottom which will deplete with the more ninjas you take care of. This is a bit unique and also lets you know exactly how many more of those masterful martial artists you have to destroy. The castle wall in which Kage has to move in all directions following the arrows climbing up to gain entrance to the castle. And then finally inside the castle where you take on the best of the best, which includes Yukinosuke, the right-hand man of the evil warlord. After this you face off against the big bad of the game, Yoshiru Yukigusa. This isn't just the final boss of the game, but every even-numbered level you have to square off against him. He is a bit more difficult because he deflects most attacks, so you have to try from different angles while avoiding his attack. Once you defeat him, you rescue the princess. This victory is short-lived as she is kidnapped once again and you have to repeat the entire process, only this time the seasons change along with the graphics. The next time I'll bring along handcuffs so she can't get away. Eventually, you will get a proper ending showing exactly what happened to Princess Kiri and Kage. At this point, the game loops endlessly until all of your lives are depleted.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
ついに出た影の伝説ファミリーコンピュータ用ソフトタイト影の伝説新発売
The arcade game was a big success for Taito, especially considering they were going to cancel the game just a few months before its release. The game did receive a number of conversions, including the most widely seen version on the NES, but more on that in just a few minutes. Although an official sequel was not released for quite some time, back in 1989, a spiritual follow-up was released on the 8-bit NES and Famicom. Demon Sword plays a lot like the original arcade version of Legend of Kage, only if it had been using performance-enhancing roids. Everything is bigger and longer when compared to the original arcade title, but you still have your standard shurikens and sword attacks. Your character also has the super high jumps, which carried him to a great success as found in the arcade original. There are a lot more stages this time around when compared to the paltry 5 of the arcade game, with the American version of Demon Sword having 7 and the Famicom having 13. Each level is huge, but they are also extremely repetitive, with it sometimes feeling like you are running in circles. There are other power-ups and spells to find which will increase the power of your shurikens or summon shadow doubles similar to Ninja Gaiden 2. There are also a number of locked doors on each level, so if you happen to find a key, you're taken to a small area in which you are granted either a piece of magic or having to face a mid-boss. If you do happen to defeat him, then you will be rewarded with additional abilities. Every couple of levels, your sword will grow just a bit. There are a number of differences between the Japanese and American releases, including an easier difficulty with the Japanese release. Most enemies can be taken out in a single hit, whereas in the USA version, the weakest of enemies will take at least 2 to finish off. The Japanese version also includes more enemies and more magic spells. Even the storylines are completely different, with the Japanese release being heavily based on Buddhist lore. In the American release, you control a warrior named Victor who has to travel the world assembling the actual Demon Sword itself. It's a fun little game, and there are English translation patches available, so if you're going to check it out, you should probably stick with the Japanese release. "24 years after the original arcade release, The Legend of Kage 2 was released for the Nintendo DS. This time around, there are 2 playable characters, Kage and Chihiro. Kage has his trusty but perhaps rusty sword and shurikens, whereas Chihiro has a giant sword-like staff with a huge chain attached to it. Thanks to the extra buttons on the Nintendo DS, there is now a separate button assigned to jumping, which does make it a bit easier. The great jumping ability from the first game makes its return, and you are still able to toss shurikens in any direction. Your character now has a dash mode, which will give your character a short burst of speed. There is also a sliding maneuver, a running slash, and a number of other brand new moves, such as hanging from the ceilings or running straight up the walls. A number of different magic spells have also been included, with the ability to collect different colored stones. You can mix and match these to create a variety of over 40 different spells. There are 12 stages in total, but similar to Demon Sword, the layouts are absolutely huge. The graphics are really nice though, utilizing both screens of the DS for the gameplay. There are some nice transparency effects as well as the obligatory parallax scrolling. The audio is nice with plenty of grunts and groans to go along with all that hacking and slashing. It's also fairly lengthy, clocking in at just about 2 hours long. If you loved the original arcade game, then you will absolutely love this one as well. Imagine Software was in charge of the European 8-bit computer ports, and I'll let you pass judgment on how they turned out. The first conversion we are looking at is for the MSX computer. If there was ever a void in your life that needed to be filled by a herky-jerky mess, then this is the game for you. The single-color enemy sprites are not only a bit on the fugly side, but the gameplay is so slow that you will think this game takes place on the moon. Factor in slow, choppy animation along with the jerky scrolling and you've got a recipe for disaster. Kudos to the developers for trying to include graphical effects from the arcade games such as the lightning strikes, but they are just too slow to be effective and they almost end up giving you a seizure. There is some decent music while you play, but the horrendous scrolling and slow gameplay makes this too much of a chore to enjoy. The ZX Spectrum port is up next, and compared to the MSX version, this one is a masterpiece. While there are some definite odd color choices, everything runs at a fairly brisk pace. That's not to say it's extremely smooth or anything, just a bit better than the MSX port. The enemies tend to get lost in the trees, making it a bit difficult when you don't know exactly how you died. There is also an enemy counter at the bottom of every level telling you exactly how many you have taken care of. As far as the audio goes, there is no music and apparently queefing ain't easy because they sound forced and wet. This version was decent but nowhere near as good as some of the other ones on this list. The Amstrad version turned out pretty good, although the scrolling utilizes the flick screen method. Everything else though looks pretty good. The graphics are fairly detailed with decent animation and fairly fast gameplay. It's not quite up to the arcade original, but it is playable and that's the main thing. The audio is really good with music and sound effects while we play, and the developers did a good job at replicating the arcade's tunes onto the humble CPC. I was pleasantly surprised by this version. The good old Commodore 64 version is not looking very good. The game starts off with a rocking rendition of the arcade tunes, but once the gameplay starts up, the music cuts out and we are left with basic sound effects. This goes along perfect with the basic graphics. The sprites are large and chunky, and the animation, if you can call it that, is strictly 2 frames. I realized that the original arcade version was no Prince of Persia, but it had way more than just 2 frames. To be fair, the scrolling is smooth, but it's not very fun to play. The SG-1000 version looks very similar to the MSX port, although it runs a bit faster. The graphics have also been upgraded, and there is some nice music while you play. The gameplay itself has also been smoothed out, and this one is actually fun to play. Apparently, this was unlicensed and only released in Taiwan. Over in Japan, it was released for the Sharp X1 Turbo computer, and this was converted by SPS software. Now, it's not arcade perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but what we have is pretty good. The graphics are nicely detailed with plenty of color and even the lightning strikes as well. The scrolling is a bit jerky though, but the music is fantastic. The game does run a bit on the slow side, which does hamper the playability. Overall though, when compared to the other 8-bit travesties, this is pretty good. The last port and the most widely seen is the NES version. This is a pretty admirable attempt at replicating the arcade original with some compromises made along the way. The game is not quite as fast as the arcade game, but there are a few different types of enemies to kill, including twin monks, black ninjas, and evil samurais. There are also some upgrades that were not found in the arcade game, such as a crystal ball, which will give you superhuman power for a short period of time. These will appear at random every time you kill a ninja or a monk. There are also various different colored bonuses depending on how many types of a certain ninja that you kill. As I mentioned, some sacrifices had to be made, including the number of shurikens on screen at once as well as the overall speed. The gameplay is pretty good, but in this version, you have to complete the game 3 times in order to see the true arcade ending. A number of plug-and-play devices were released, including Let's TV Play Classic, including Taito Nostalgia 1, which allows you to play The Legend of Kage and other assorted Taito classics. In the Legend of Kage collection, there is something called the Revised Legend of Kage, which gives you the option of playing as 2 new characters, including a female ninja, as well as man's best friend. In 2006, a 3D remake was included in the compilation Taito Legends Power Up for the PSP. This is fantastic with updated visuals and audio. The cool thing about this is that we get not only the updated 3D remake, but also the original arcade version as well. The game has been re-released a number of times over the years, including the NES title both in Japan and in America on the Wii Virtual Console. It was also available on the 3DS Virtual Console. It is one of the many offerings available in the compilation title Taito Legends 2. The Legend of Kage was another excellent side-scrolling adventure from the wizards at Taito. The company produced a huge number of arcade classics, and this one is right up there with the best of the best. It's too bad we never received a proper arcade sequel, but the Nintendo DS version is not too bad. If you've never had the chance to kill some evil monks, all the while scaling a castle wall as you rescue your beloved princess, be sure and give The Legend of Kage a try. You'll be glad you did. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. If you would like to contribute but not sign up for my Patreon, you can always click the donate button up above. Thanks everyone for watching.